Hello and welcome to another panel discussion that we have today. We're going to talk about VAT on digital services. It's kind of a bit different to VIDA, but you know, the guys that operate in this space, they have so many VAT obligations, and so there's a lot to discuss. So I'm joined today by two fantastic speakers, nervous speakers, experts in their industry. Melissa O'Brien from Shopify and Trish O'Brien from MongoDB. So welcome, ladies. Welcome to the couch. So we're going to just start off. If you could just give us a bit of an introduction of yourself and your business. Melissa, we start with you.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So my name is Melissa O'Brien. I'm Senior Indirect Tax Lead for Shopify. Shopify is a Canadian company, and really we're in the business of e-commerce software. So we would provide a kind of suite of software tools that would allow kind of any person or any merchant to sell online. So, you know, the website itself, payments, you know, all those emails, tracking, inventory, POS. So it's really kind of all about making commerce better for everyone and making, you know, enabling entrepreneurs, etc., to get online and sell online.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Melissa. Trish?
Thanks. Well, I'm Trish O'Brien. I'm Director for Global Indirect Tax with MongoDB. I'm relatively new to the company, so 9 months in, so a bit of a change. But we offer database solutions, which at a high level I'm going to describe as SaaS, software as a service. We have a presence in about 30 countries and we're selling globally. So huge obligations in this space for us.
Yeah, so let's just start by talking about those obligations and why your business run into so many global VAT obligations, and then just what is the biggest challenges then you have to kind of meet those obligations, and how do you keep on top of them really?
I think that's kind of the key question is keeping on top of it. And, you know, it's really hard to kind of keep on top of everything that's going on and, you know, making sure that companies are compliant, because I think that's kind of your fundamental aim. It is, you know, I think in terms of difficulties, it really is looking at that. You know, there's always countries that you'll run into that are more difficult than others, you know, like, you know, speaking personally, the likes of some of the GCC countries have been quite difficult, like Saudi Arabia or UAE, you know, really finding, I think, you know, with those countries, that, you know, young country when it comes to VAT, so not a lot of precedent, not a lot of experience there. And I think also, you know, anybody that's worked on software, you know, electronically supplied services, digital services in India will always kind of, you know, understand the difficulties of even trying to make a payment in India. You know, I think anybody that's there knows the difficulty of, you know, trying to raise a challan, which I'd never heard of before, and I never found it so difficult to pay a tax office as I have in India.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a similar experience in India. Hugely challenging. Our Irish entity is just registered in India. It's taken us almost 6 months to make a payment. So that's been hugely challenging. And the other issue that we've had is, you know, while they catch you for B2C, they kind of caught you for B2B as well, because they expect you to file a B2B return listing all of your B2B supplies with their VAT numbers. So hugely challenging with our data.
Yeah. So and then on the payment side, what we've heard as well, and we've had situations like this, that you it's so difficult to make the payment, and so you're late making the payment.
Yeah.
Then you get a penalty, and you're late making the penalty because it's so difficult to make a payment. So it's just kind of ongoing spiral of issues with particular countries, and just that you have that kind of global impact. So not all Europe, and we talk about Europe today and the challenges of Europe. But you guys really are operating in a global space.
Yeah. I mean, the other one that springs to mind is South Africa. And, you know, from my experience with a previous organization, you know, it started out as a relatively small kind of regime with limited services and scope. I think that was back in 2014 or thereabouts. Then in 2019, they came along, amended the legislation, expanding the scope of the services. So you were scrambling internally with all of your teams to, you know, get all your systems updated again, and, apply the correct rate of tax. And then what do we see happening now? We see the legislation, a proposal in the tax bill to potentially unravel that, only requiring non-resident entities to charge tax in South Africa on your B2C sales. Okay. So they're talking about, you know, easing the administrative burden, but sure, we now have to go unravel everything.
So they started out with B2B and B2C, now they're moving back to B2C, which is kind of odd. And are there other countries Russia had B2B. There's lots of other countries that have that kind of B2B situation still.
Malaysia, I think maybe another one as well. That is.
I think Kenya sticks out in mind as well because they catch you for a digital services tax as well. So I know we're being caught by Kenya at the moment, and they're saying to us, no, you need to register for digital services tax and then you can register for VAT.
Yeah.
And
So
I think
it's kind of
the equalisation levy that we see in India as well, that we talked about earlier, you know, it's not just the VAT, it's other taxes as well. And that really fall under us too.
Yeah, and that's it. They're falling under my team as well. So not only do we have VAT, but we also have digital services tax and the equalisation levies to worry about as well.
Yeah. And can you talk about the parts of your business that are predominantly B2B, but you still have some obligations because of B2C, because maybe you didn't get a VAT number, you didn't validate a VAT number. So how do you manage that kind of situation?
And I think that is a big pain point, I think, for a lot of companies. You know, we would consider our business a B2B business. You're not really setting up a shop online if you're not going to be in business. So we don't kind of, you know, from an EU perspective, we're B2B, it is. But that when you move into some of the other countries, you know, globally, there is that distinction of, you know, how do you distinguish between a B2B and a B2C? You know, is it enough to have the VAT number, you know, having to obtain the VAT number, maintain it, validate it, or is there any kind of checks that have to be done in terms of, you know, for the merchant or the customer to confirm that they actually are in business as well. So, you know, that really is kind of difficult to do that. And also, there's also the impact on kind of other parts of the business is that, you know, we haven't got a VAT ID from a customer, so we've charged VAT because that's what we're supposed to do. But then the customer rings in going, but I'm registered for VAT, why you charge me VAT? And so it's, you know, not just impact on our returns, it's kind of impacts maybe on billing and customer service as well. So, it's kind of difficult trying to distinguish that B2B versus B2C.
Yeah. I think the other challenge as well is the sheer volume of all of these regimes as well. You know, there's so many to keep up with, and being relatively new to the organisation that I'm with, we're a little bit behind, so to speak, in terms of where we should be in terms of our compliance. So it's trying to manage, you know, what do we do next? What do we prioritise? You know, what tax authorities are chasing after us, who have named and shamed us, you know, in their local gazette.
Yes, I was going to say, like, how do you decide what your next priority is? Because it's quite a fast moving situation. So how do you keep on top of that?
Well, like I said, you know, for us and I can only speak from my perspective, you know, it's looking at, well, what is the revenue? Is there thresholds, VAT registration thresholds in that countries? How aggressive do we think that tax administration is? What are their interest and penalties? You know, and that named and shamed on a list with a local gazette. No company wants to be named and shamed. It's because it's a bad PR.
So that puts it to the top of the list for you?
It absolutely does. Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that's how we look at it, at least. Yeah,
no, similar. You know, we can't get to everything. You know, you're looking at nearly a VAT registration or GST registration in the majority of countries across the world. So you just have to prioritise things depending, you know, on the amount of business that you're going to do in that country. You know, I think a name and shame would definitely push somebody to the top of our list as well. And, you know, some of the penalty regimes in some of these countries are really aggressive. You know, you could be looking at personal liability on some of the directors of the companies, and that's not a place I think any tax team or VAT team wants to be, to have to tell a director that. So it really is kind of, you know, assessing the risk and realising, you know, which one is kind of going to take precedent over others. Yeah.
And the OECD made a recommendation, you know, that these kind of services that are provided by non-resident businesses to consumers, there should be a simplified registration model. They should make it as easy as possible for non-resident businesses to be able to operate and, you know, collect and pay over the VAT. And so do you have a sense of that the countries are listening to that? Or you spoke earlier about, you know, there are lobbying groups that and they're listening to certain lobbying groups.
You know, to bring Liz, I suppose, back into the conversation as well, you know, for Meta, you know, we would have a reliance on Liz, I suppose, and the representations that she would make, you know, to the various forums that she's part of, you know, listening to us, you know, that are, you know, small or medium-sized firms, and what we can or can't deal with. So that's really important, I think.
Yeah, because even though you're small, you're still operating on a global scale, and so you're going to run into the challenges, and you may have less resources to be able to deal with them.
Absolutely, but I think, you know, these tax authorities, when they, you know, get their hands on the bigger multinationals like the Microsofts, the Amazons, and the Googles, and the Metas of the world. They come after us next.
Yeah.
So
you think they're kind of nearly finished with the bigger ones? And
I think so, because we've been
focus.
contacted directly by a couple of tax authorities now. So it looks like we're the next tier down.
You're the next tier down.
Us.
You're on the hit list.
We're on the hit list.
Okay. And you find that when the hit list hits, it is quite aggressive, like from a penalty point of view. Like, have you experienced heavy audits, heavy penalties?
I would say personally not at this stage. I think I'm certainly in a position where you can have almost a discussion with some of the tax authorities where they contact you directly. You can almost negotiate with them a little bit in terms of, okay, if we register, if by certain dates, they might reduce penalties or, kind of remove interest and things like that. So
and some of them do kind of voluntary disclosure regimes. I think that's quite a little bit, appears to be a little bit more popular in some other countries outside the EU, where they'll have a kind of, if you come to us now, we'll mitigate the penalty, but you'll have interest on the payment. So that's always something to really kind of look out for, in the likes of countries like Malaysia, where they maybe might run for 18 months and say, look, if you should have registered and you didn't, this is what we'll do. And I think that's been quite successful in some of the countries because, instead of being reluctant to come forward and kind of get everything in order, you'll do that because you know that, you have a little bit of protection.
Yeah. Yeah. And we see this year alone, I've heard of Morocco, Senegal, Botswana. You had mentioned some other countries today as well.
Yeah. I mean, we're a little bit behind, as I said. So, we're trying to play catch up almost. But yeah, you just have to look at all of the communications that are coming out, from Taxback and all the other advisory firms to see, the Philippines, Senegal, Morocco, the Ivory Coast, they're all there, they're all coming. So,
and even with Botswana and the announcement of Botswana, it said that 2024, but not sure what date, particularly in 2024. So it's kind of like that Vida situation. Like, there's still so much uncertainty, but you actually have so much more to be dealing with because you need to then register in all these countries. And you
have like the likes of Jordan. It's like we've opened up the portal, but we haven't, published any legislation. So it's like, do you want to register? Well, not till I see the legislation. It is. So some really kind of funny rules coming around.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we have those new obligations and those new countries. And just again, back on the difficulty then with the new countries. Like, so is fiscal representation still in there for some countries, or do you have challenges like that in these countries, or the majority are those simplified registrations?
I think the majority are. I know we've recently registered in Thailand, which was actually quite a lot more straightforward than we expected. And sometimes you do, especially with the language barrier, sometimes you do need the fiscal rep to kind of really even find out where you're supposed to contact. It's not kind of so straightforward. And that can be kind of, the language barrier can be a little bit difficult, that maybe having the fiscal rep there for you works in your benefit as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think the other thing is, the advisors in some of these countries, it's not black and white. It's really hard, to get a straight answer from some of the advisors, and then to try and implement something in your systems with the unknown. So that's...
Yeah, so I suppose even down to digital services. So how do you deal with the definitions of digital services around the world? So in Europe, we kind of have this standard description of what a digital service is. Is it the same around the world, or does it vary a lot?
I've found it quite similar, actually. I suppose because we've got software. We're not so difficult to define, really. That we're providing software services, so it really is, I think, one of the constants that you have when you look at the definitions. But I find the definition quite consistent.
Yeah, so do I. I don't think I've had any particular challenges, where a tax authority, haven't been unclear.
Yeah.
So
I think they want us to be under the definition as well. So
well, that's it.
Absolutely. Yeah, because they want to, get the tax and and that's it, and realize the tax. So so it's a lot of challenge in this space, really, and so it's just that monitoring of the situation, understanding where your B2B rules are applying and where your B2C rules are applying. Anything else that you need to consider in your day-to-day workings?
I think for me as well, it's about the internal aspect of it as well. Bringing all your key stakeholders in as well. And lining all of them up, in terms of, your AOR team, your tax engine, all of the technology, setting up your compliance model. Have you got the budgets, for the project? Like, there's all of those considerations as well. And I know a lot of people have referenced it already that, we're a small company. We don't have an army behind us either. Like, if Meta don't, we certainly don't. There's 2 or 3 of us on the indirect tax team, and we're trying to manage all of these. So we've the same challenges as everybody else.
I think as well, even the format of invoices and making sure, the engineers want it consistent, they don't want to have to implement something else as well. And that can be difficult. And also currency can be another thing, if you've got a company or a business, and as was said earlier, you don't want to be a stopper for business. They want to issue invoices maybe in USD, but, when you're in some of these countries, they expect for the invoices to be in local currency or to have the local currency equivalent on the invoice. And also you're paying in that currency as well. So there's always kind of this FX difference between maybe what you're collecting and what you're paying as well. So, that's something to consider. And kind of really talking about internal stakeholders, it can be hard. And I think Liz mentioned it earlier in terms of getting engineers to work on some of these things. And, even looking at invoicing, we're looking at Serbia, e-invoicing and e-reporting is a big thing in Serbia, but we've had so many false starts with e-invoicing in the EU. They're starting to go, is this really happening? Because we're lining it up saying e-invoicing is coming in Poland, we need to be ready. Oh no, it's not, let's stop, we're okay. So it's really, trying to align your kind of stakeholders to go, this is something that we need to work on and we need to move up the priority list. And that's this imaginary list that you need to kind of move up.
My key learning for today, or take back to the company, is follow Liz on LinkedIn.
We're all following Liz on LinkedIn.
Exactly.
But I think that's it. You don't want to be the boy that cried wolf all the time, because then nobody's listening to you. But you do have these kind of moving parts, especially with e-invoicing. And e-invoicing in this space as well, because we're going beyond Europe. So, you mentioned Serbia there with their e-invoicing and their e-reporting. I think Malaysia also is introducing e-invoicing this year. So, the main reason that we invited you today to speak was just to give a flavour of not just Europe, when you work in indirect tax and particularly in the digital services space, you have to consider your global obligations and just the complexity that brings even to just one element, digital services, So advice for anybody in your space, just, the best kind of management tool that you have to manage the obligations. And I know you spoke about, how things end up on your priority list, but is there certain pitfalls that people could avoid, or maybe countries? I don't know if you can avoid a country, but like if you could tell somebody to avoid that at all costs, or what is the kind of best piece of advice that you could give somebody in this space?
I think for me, maybe it's just to stay connected with the industry forums, and to know almost that you're not alone, because it can be quite scary, if you have, an aggressive tax authority knocking on your door and you start to panic maybe a little bit. You need to kind of take a step back and know that, I'm not out there on my own. There's, 10 other multinationals out there behind me that haven't done this either. So I think it's important to stay connected with your peers, and leverage each other,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's key. And, to be able to ask, well, did the tax office actually follow through? Like, is this an empty threat? Is this kind of their norm? Is this the way they operate? Do I have to take them very seriously? Do they have to move up my priority list, or, can I just take it easy here?
Exactly.
So absolutely networking and staying in touch and lobbying as well. So to get involved again in the lobbying for these simplifications.
I think that's hugely important, especially when, the tax authorities have, these requirements for fiscal representation or local bank accounts. And, it's to put those, justifications forward through the forums and lobby, I suppose, we want to be compliant, but if you remove 1, 2, and 3, you can have the tax tomorrow.
You remove your barriers, your own barriers to compliance, and we will comply. Absolutely. Melissa, any kind of other pieces?
I think Patricia's kind of said it all. Really, it is about keeping contact and getting practical advice, whether it's through the forums or even through Taxback and these kind of events that we have. Is you're also not alone, and that there's other people going through the same thing. And I don't think any company is perfect. When it comes, especially with so many of these digital services moving so quickly and introducing legislation so quickly. And I think sometimes the tax office in these local countries think they're the only, country in the world that's issuing this law, but it's not. We probably have another 50 or 60 behind you. So, look, it is hard to keep up in it, but, a lot of people are in the same boat.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, to mention as well that we are now focused on digital services, but there is kind of a general move to remote services. So not just digital services, but remote services, and bringing remote services into the same kind of thinking, that if you provide remote services to consumers and you're a non-resident, then you're going to be pulled into the same kind of obligations as you guys are. So I think we've seen that in Australia, and we see that in Norway, where their legislation is not writing in about digital services anymore. The legislation is talking about remote services. And so there's so many other businesses then being brought into the same kind of obligations that you guys are experiencing now. So it's good, just everybody out there that, thinking, oh, I don't provide digital services, I'm fine. We are kind of moving in a world where it'll be remote services. And if you provide remote services, you might end up in the same situation where you're looking at Botswana and thinking, where the hell is Botswana? And what am I going to do with my Botswanan VAT obligations? Yeah, so final words, or have we covered it all?
I think we covered a lot.
Yeah, I think we have. Yeah.
We've covered it all. I think it was great just to hear from yourselves of how things are going for you, how you prioritize countries, the kind of risks that you're facing and how you're managing it. Just again about that B2B to B2C. People might not kind of understand that okay, I'm a B2B operator, but I still have B2C obligations, and why is that? So thanks so much for explaining it all today.